Europe just made its biggest military move since the Cold War, a $50 billion move with implications far beyond the battlefields of Ukraine. A move that sent shockwaves all the way to Moscow, to the desk of Vladimir Putin himself, and signals a dramatic long-term shift in Europe's long-term security strategy as the continent seeks to strengthen its ability to fend off future aggression, while also reducing its long-standing reliance on America's unrivaled military might. For Russia, this isn't merely a bit of bad news, it's the country's worst nightmare come to life. But before we dig into the implications, let's explore exactly what happened. The 2026 NATO summit was held in Ankara, Turkey, on July 7 to 8. Numerous heads of state and government were in attendance, along with other officials, including NATO Secretary-General Mark Rutte and the presidents and prime ministers of various NATO and non-NATO nations. One of the biggest names on the guest list was British Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer, who served as PM since 2024 but announced his resignation in late June, meaning that the Ankara summit would be his final appearance at a major NATO meeting. And he clearly decided to go out with a bang. On July 8, Starmer revealed that the UK would take a leading role in a bold new European initiative to develop deep precision strike capabilities across Europe. In an announcement published on the British government website, the PM said, "I'm determined to ensure the safety of the UK and our allies, and to do that, we must step up to deliver a stronger, more European NATO. The UK is already working with partners to develop exquisite capability that will give our armed forces the ability to defend and deter thousands of kilometers from the front line. But this UK-led initiative will allow us to step up our cooperation, bringing European allies together to ensure NATO remains safe and secure for years to come." The British government went on to note that Starmer would be convening the leaders of a dozen different European nations to discuss the details of the initiative before the summit concluded. In addition to the UK, the participating nations are Denmark, Estonia, Finland, France, Germany, the Netherlands, Norway, Romania, Spain, Sweden, and Turkey. They released a joint statement shortly after Starmer's announcement, stating, "We've committed to stepping up and strengthening the alliance's deterrence and defence. In particular, we recognise the need to increase our deep precision strike (DPS) capabilities. We therefore recognise the need to proactively invest in these capabilities and accelerate procurement and delivery, including through multinational initiatives. We are collectively determined to invest $50.66 billion in DPS over the next 10 years. That's the headline. $50 billion dedicated entirely to deep precision strike capabilities over the course of the next decade. And that investment has already begun. The UK has already put £3 billion, just over $4 billion, into its own long-range fire programs. That includes £770 million, or $1 billion, for a joint stealth and hypersonic weapons program with Germany, which intends to create a brand new ground-launched missile with a range in excess of 2,000 kilometers, or 1,250 miles. £1.4 billion, or $1.9 billion, is also going towards Stratus, a trilateral program involving Italy and France, aiming to create the successor to the Storm Shadow missile, which has been used to great effect by Ukraine in its war with Russia. These are just two examples. Given the total amount of funding for this program, combined with the fact that it's set to run for 10 years, it could involve the development of various additional missile systems, dramatically expanding Europe's overall arsenal and significantly strengthening its deep strike and deterrence capabilities. It's easy to understand why Europe feels that now is the right time to make a move of this magnitude. The first and most obvious factor is the war in Ukraine. In the decades after the end of the Cold War, many European nations dramatically reduced their defense spending, like Germany and the United Kingdom. They did this because they believed that the days of large-scale conflict on European battlefields were over. They simply couldn't envision a world in which another war broke out so close to home. So they made what seemed like a logical decision to spend less on defense. After all, why waste money building tanks and paying the salaries of hundreds of thousands of soldiers when war seemed so unlikely? Then 2022 happened. Russia invaded Ukraine, and those long-standing assumptions about everlasting peace across the European continent collapsed like a flimsy deck of cards. Europe realized it can no longer operate as though a major conventional war was impossible. This led to a surge in defense spending and the development of new security initiatives across the continent, with the likes of Poland and Germany playing leading roles. But Europe wasn't merely reacting to the war in Ukraine. It was closely observing it, watching how Ukraine, a country that was supposed to be so inferior to Russia in all major military metrics, was managing to defend itself so successfully and learning valuable lessons in the process, especially about the value of long-range precision strikes. Kyiv's forces have used long-range drones and missiles to wreak havoc across the occupied territories and deep into Russia's regions, as well as destroying logistics nodes, severing supply lines, blowing up ammunition depots, and striking the likes of command centers, military factories, airfields, and oil refineries. This has proven to be one of Ukraine's most effective tactics in terms of turning the tide of the battle and dealing the maximum amount of damage to its enemy in the shortest amount of time. Should the war ever extend beyond the borders of Ukraine and into the likes of Poland or the Baltic states, the rest of Europe will need to follow Kyiv's example, making smart and efficient use of long-range precision weapons to hit Russia where it hurts the most. Another uncontestable factor behind Europe's decision to develop deep strike weapons relates to the United States. The US is by far the strongest military superpower on the planet, and even though there are 32 nations in NATO, America has long provided the majority of the alliance's overall strength. European countries have heavily depended on the US not just for protection and security guarantees, but for actual military equipment as well, especially when it comes to the kind of high-end military technologies that are indispensable in modern warfare, such as satellites, software, and advanced fighter jets. Europe has for years had little choice but to buy American. This meant that, were a war to ever break out that involved a NATO nation, alliance members wouldn't just be banking on the American army to protect them, but would also be using primarily US-made equipment and weapons in their own militaries. In many ways, it was an unhealthy and unsustainable dependency, and in recent years, Europe has been forced to reassess this dependency. Under President Donald Trump, the US has urged European NATO nations to commit more of their money to their respective militaries, with all members of the alliance agreeing to spend 5% of their GDP on defense and security by 2035. European leaders have also sought to diversify their investments, like Poland buying K2 tanks from South Korea, while strengthening their domestic defense industries and pursuing new projects with their neighbors. And this brings us back to the $50 billion Deep Strike initiative, which is by far the biggest and best example so far of Europe collectively affirming its commitment to rely less on the US and start standing up for itself much more than before. It doesn't mean that Europe is severing ties with America, nor that it intends to stop investing in US military hardware. It's simply a question of becoming less dependent and better prepared to defend its interests. It's also a clear message to Moscow, as UK Foreign Secretary Yvette Cooper stated, "With deep precision strike capability, the UK and our allies will be able to hit high-value military targets and the logistical engines that drive armies, deterring any aggressor and strengthening our mutual security. At Ankara, we're sending a clear message to President Putin. NATO is stronger, more European, and ready to defend our citizens against the long-term threat posed by him and the Russian state." Now, there have been long rumors that Putin has set his sights far beyond Ukraine and could be planning a much larger attack on other parts of Europe in the years to come. This announcement could be enough to put those plans on hold indefinitely. But before we explain why, this is why we make the military show, to explain how power really moves. So, if you're new here, hit subscribe so you don't miss what's happening next. Now, the entirety of the UK's announcement will have undoubtedly triggered alarm bells in the halls of the Kremlin, but the part that should really frighten Putin is the mention of new stealth and hypersonic weapons with a range of over 2,000 kilometers. Up to now, many of Europe's best missiles have struggled with the same issue: limited range. The Storm Shadow, for example, can hit targets up to 550 kilometers, 342 miles away. The Taurus KEPD-350 boasts a similar maximum range of around 500 kilometers or 310 miles. The MBDA Meteor, meanwhile, can travel just 200 kilometers or 120 miles from the point of launch. These are all advanced missiles with plenty of unique features and advantages, but their real-world applications are restricted by the fact that they can only go so far. In a hypothetical war with Russia, such weapons would have limited utility. It wouldn't be possible, for instance, for Europe to fire on logistical nodes and military infrastructure deep in Russia's regions with the likes of Storm Shadows and Taurus missiles alone. Once this new program begins to bear fruit, however, everything will change. With a hypersonic long-range missile at its disposal, Europe could see countless new targets come into range. Those targets could include the likes of Russian command centers, air bases, transport networks, military production facilities, and specific strategic assets like bomber fleets and air defense systems as well. Since these are precision weapons with pinpoint accuracy and the most minimal margins of error, it would be feasible for Europe's NATO nations to launch their missiles from locations like Poland, Romania, or the Baltic states towards targets all across Western Russia, wiping enemy assets and infrastructure off the map in the blink of an eye. If we were to imagine a hypothetical Baltic invasion, for example, involving Russian forces crossing the border into Estonia or Latvia, Europe would have the weapons it needs to not merely to defend those locations, but to disrupt Russia's logistics and punish Putin's aggression. It could target the supply routes, staging areas, ammo dumps, and headquarters far beyond the front lines, making it increasingly difficult and costly for Russia to continue with the conflict. With rail hubs out of action, bridges destroyed, and airfields on fire, for example, the Kremlin's forces would find it much harder to move troops, weapons, ammunition, food, and fuel to the front lines. This in turn would make it harder for the country's army to advance, while making it easier for any invaded nations to defend themselves. Given how much of modern warfare is dependent on logistics, continuous strikes of this kind could eventually force Russia to give up on the war altogether and withdraw its forces. But it wouldn't necessarily need to get that far, because potentially, the biggest role these new European missiles have to play isn't about bombing air bases or blowing up supply lines. It's about deterrence. Europe may not even need to launch a single one of its missiles. Simply possessing them could be enough to dissuade Russia from committing any acts of aggression against the NATO alliance or the European Union. For a long time, Putin has been in a position of strength. He spent years and trillions of rubles building one of the world's biggest armies. While European nations focused their funds elsewhere, Russia continued to pour massive amounts of money into tanks, missiles, and drones. While Europe sold off its old tanks and armored vehicles to emerging nations, Russia stockpiled its Soviet-era assets in vast warehouses. While Europe's militaries grew weaker, Russia's grew stronger. Putin still had to contend with the threat of US action if he decided to attack NATO, but he knew that Europe alone would struggle to defend itself. This is partly why rumors and reports have swirled in recent years about the Kremlin leader plotting an attack on the Baltics or another European nation like Finland or Poland. The only real deterrent Europe could point to was America, since its own armies had become so fragmented and underfunded. Fortunately, that's starting to change. If the 12 nations involved in this new initiative can stick to their 10-year deadline, or even accelerate their efforts to produce new missiles in the next 5 or 6 years, they will at last be able to defend their sovereignty and deter Russian aggression by themselves. Because if Putin knows that Europe has a vast cache of long-range missiles ready to wipe out his logistics, headquarters, and air defenses at any given moment, the prospect of invading Europe suddenly seems far less appealing. As UK Defence Secretary Dan Jarvis notes, "We are building the weapons of the future to keep the UK and NATO secure for decades to come, backed by billions of pounds and working with our closest European allies. Our new suite of deep precision strike weapons will give our forces the ability to strike targets hundreds of kilometers away with great accuracy, strengthening NATO and deterring our adversaries." And this isn't just about precision strike weapons, because Europe is doing much more than making some new missiles. It's taking numerous steps towards strengthening its defenses, making NATO more European and reducing its reliance on the United States. These initiatives fall under the broader banner of the European Commission's Readiness 2030 project. The ultimate goal of this project is for Europe to achieve both military readiness and independence by 2030. It's extremely ambitious, and some experts have already warned that the 2030 deadline may come a little too soon for Europe to achieve actual autonomy. The Sparta 2.0 report, for example, published by the Kiel Institute for the World Economy, notes that it would require around $500 billion in addition to the money that Europe is already pouring into its defense projects in order to close 10 critical gaps that exist in the continent's military capabilities today. Now, one of the most urgent gaps to address is in regard to command and control, since Europe doesn't have its own Palantir-like system which is so vital in modern military operations. Another gap is the continent's inability to produce autonomous systems at scale, not simply buying up thousands of drones, but being able to make millions of them each year. There are also several gaps related to air defense, since production, ammunition, and stocks in this category are seriously lacking all across Europe. And the continent also has work to do in terms of military cloud and combat AI, strategic transport, and electronic warfare. An excessive reliance on American Tomahawk and JASSM missiles means that Europe also has a gap in its precision deep strike capabilities. That gap, however, is already being plugged by the new $50.66 billion initiative, and several of the other issues mentioned previously are being actively addressed as well. Several countries are working on new air defense systems, for example, while others are exploring new reconnaissance satellite technologies, surveillance systems, and command and control integration. The Sparta 2.0 authors also encourage countries to form resilient leading coalitions tailored to their specific strengths. The likes of France, Poland, and the UK, for example, could take charge of strategic programs, long-range conventional capabilities, and discussions on nuclear policy, while the Northern European nations and Baltic states would focus on maritime security and electronic warfare, and Germany could lead the way in terms of air defense and counter-drone technologies. The study also notes that, while it may seem as though Europe faces vast challenges, none of them are insurmountable, nor do they necessarily require years to solve. And the clearest proof of that can be seen in Ukraine. It began the war with Russia with a relatively weak military, a meager defense budget, and a defense industry that largely revolved around exporting goods to other nations rather than strengthening itself. Fast forward a few years, and Ukraine is one of Europe's military superpowers. Its military is capable of going toe-to-toe with Russia, its defense industry has evolved and expanded enormously, and it's become a world leader in the field of drone warfare. And now it makes many of its own defenses and weapon systems, including long-range missiles like the Long Neptune and Flamingo. Ukraine even made its own Palantir-style cloud-based situational awareness and battlefield management system, Deter, in just 18 months, which has since been heralded as one of the best systems of its kind outside the US. If one country with limited funding can do all of that in less than half a decade, there's no telling how much progress Europe as a whole could make by pooling its intellect, capital, and resources, taking what it's learned from the war in Ukraine, and making the necessary changes to prevent the same thing happening again in the future. So, even though the new missile plan is estimated to take 10 years, we could see a very different Europe in half that time as the continent continues its push towards stronger defense and deterrence. In short, if Putin truly does have plans for an attack on the Baltics or an invasion of Poland, whatever window of opportunity you may once have had is now inches away from slamming shut for good. And European nations aren't the only NATO members beefing up their defenses. You can learn how Canada is making moves to become a more serious military force in this video. Or if you'd like to learn more about the state of play in the Russia-Ukraine war, check out this video, which details a recent Ukrainian strike on one of Russia's biggest oil refineries. And finally, don't forget to subscribe to The Military Show for more breaking news and insightful analysis on the latest military matters from across the globe.